Okay, broadcasting.
Is it broadcasting?
Yeah, the green light's on. Yeah.
Oh my god, that's awkward.
I know, right?
So awkward.
I want to be the fountains film.
Hey. Hey.
Oh my goodness.
Hey. Hi. Thanks for coming.
Alright, so I think.
How are you?
I don't. Is that the. Wait. Okay. Because I feel like. Wait, is it Google or is it on YouTube?
Okay, it's on both, I think. Hold up. Okay.
Because you should just put. Because wait, what are you actually
Hold
doing
up.
though?
Wait.
Because there's no one like actually on your thing.
More papers.
Okay. So it's saying that we're on live.
But like, who's? I'm just gonna.
Okay. You take care of that. I am just
Well, that's
gonna.
serious, but we don't take any like math or science specific. It has to be like
He's not sure if he wants to go to studies or.
He wants to do global studies.
I don't know.
You thought about it?
Yeah, I'm already set on sociology, so I'm gonna double major.
Oh, I see.
But I was considering it. I might want to do
3 years. I don't know if you recognize me.
justice studies maybe.
Justice studies?
Yeah.
Human rights?
Okay, so I mentioned
Yeah,
the
one of those.
summer. I was part of the first one, 2011.
Yeah.
And I was a student from UC Riverside. I was talking to you about the Irvine 11 because I know 3 of those students. They were Riverside
I
students.
remember.
And that was not mentioned in the media about like how like the opposition had done the same thing, like heckling and all that.
Right.
But for some reason, heckler's veto did not apply to them.
Of course, so.
Yeah. So yeah, see, these are things applicable to this conversation.
Yeah,
So
I'm glad to bring it full circle. Sorry I'm late.
Kavneet Singh is definitely coming to Desi Standard Time, so no worries about that.
Have you heard from him?
Yeah, he said that he'll be here in a few minutes.
Okay.
But it's okay.
Yeah, it's rush hour, so.
Yeah.
Should
So,
be fine.
inshallah. And I mean, I'm sick, so excuse me that, you know, I really wish I could be dressed up professionally like you are and everything.
You're a student. No one.
I'm graduating. I should live up to standards. Right?
I feel like the standard for students is to enjoy denim as long as they can.
Denim as long as they can.
You're not in sweatpants.
That's true, and I'm not in basketball shorts either. So
That's true, college student.
I'm trying.
Oh, are you gonna go to Tilly?
So I was thinking I'll say the first 2 paragraphs, and then you'll say the last 3 paragraphs, okay?
Sure. All right.
And
Wait.
and I'll probably say the introductions for Zahra, Billoo, and you can say one for Kavneet Singh, maybe.
Okay, sure.
Okay.
Is this working?
Well, I mean the green light is on.
Yeah, but
Does anyone have their laptop on them? No.
I do it, but it's not.
wait, it says Manpreet's on here.
Oh, okay. So I guess.
Hi. Do you hear me? Wait. He sent me a smiley face.
Huh?
Okay, he hears me.
No, I think we're good.
Okay, I guess it works then.
Okay.
How do I look?
He said stream is looking good.
He means me.
Okay.
Actually, I'm not though.
Well, I'm not
I
sure. I
should
think
have
like
totally
if, let's
made
say you're in
your
an
son.
accident and your brain dead, but like your organs still survive.
It's because he thought his live stream worked. That's like,
Do you have installation?
Mm-hmm.
yes.
They start.
My face is off limits. This is just for me. but-
I'm not donating.
I mean, I'm
So happy that I'm finally reuniting with you and everything. And like this conversation is very much needed here on our campus because anyone who spoke out against Islamophobia, Palestine, that is a beautiful shirt.
Yeah, I love it.
You're really
criminalized. Really, I mean, versus Korean, like, so you're friends with her. Yeah, and I mean, I'm in the district department. I graduated from the district department, so I have to deal with that monster.
Right. How is it when we did the SJP? Like they just formed an SJP, right?
Yeah, just a few minutes ago they concluded their first general body meeting.
Awesome. How was it? Were you there? How was it?
It's good. It's good.
Where's my soda?
How many people came? Yeah, that's good. For first meeting?
For first meeting, it's very decent stuff.
Yeah.
Be like a strict
We'll have some rocky waters in the first 6 months or so.
Okay, yeah.
It's part of the struggle.
Everybody, of course.
You're from here.
Yes.
You don't want here.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Israelis are huge.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I know her from UC.
Oh, so you're a graduate student as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Dana, Neil.
Yeah. I haven't met Dana yet, I don't think. She's newer.
Yeah, she's new. She just started this summer.
Yeah.
So.
Did you go to UC Davis?
Yeah, I just finished this,
Okay.
this summer. So.
What are you doing?
Master's in civil engineering.
Okay.
Kind of weird for me. I mean, engineers usually stay around these things, but I'm whole opposition. All this stuff.
Some engineers, you know, it's different. Like engineers. I don't know. There's a lot
This
of
is a black and
engineers.
white
Because like
profession, but you do have a soul, even though it's not.
No, but I mean,
And in most cases, you're not selling your soul.
Like that.
Yes.
Like,
I mean, it's
yeah, aerospace engineers are selling their soul.
true. So
I mean,
is Caltrans.
Huh?
So is Caltrans to an extent.
Really? Why?
Let's just say there's a lot of top level corruption.
Okay.
But they have an excuse that that's just do it. A lot of times Caltrans doesn't do anything because when they do something, it's like multi-million-dollar.
What high school?
So, but I do think they could do a lot
Some Hannibal Lecter
Who
type.
else is not
public
like
transit.
Right.
They're like, why should they?
Manpreet Singh.
Funded by the
Okay, he hears us and
automobile
everything.
lobby, so.
I guess it's a spectrum of selling your soul, right?
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, I was an aerospace engineer.
Our other
Really?
speaker
And
is
switched from
Manpreet Singh. He's
aerospace
coming
to
to
civil.
Standard
My
Time.
emphasis is on resources and environmental.
okay.
So, travel and everything.
I think
And
we're
also
cool.
like water policy, I went to one public policy.
Okay.
I remember reading
Hopefully it'll
Boston,
help.
we had a retreat.
Oh.
That's my car.
It's my favorite software.
And I didn't know who he was, so I was just like standing and he just approached me. He started asking all like all these like sick freedom sort of questions. And I'm like, I didn't want to ask him like, excuse me, what are you? We were at a retreat and I was one of the main organizers. Like, we had the retreat for Big Up Air here.
What was it for?
We call it solidarity.
I wanted to tell you
retreat.
something.
But,
So UC Davis, they have a minor study program,
Yeah.
and it's called South Asian Middle Eastern Studies. And it reminds me of the acronym you actually unintentionally wrote out at one meeting, in which you wrote out SALDEF. I was like, yeah, UC Davis has it.
You have people from like all you from Egypt to Bangladesh or Afghanistan, so many different cultures. They're so divided. You know, Iranians don't like Ratis. Indians don't like others. So I was one of the student volunteers.
At UC
I
Davis,
didn't
Zanina
exactly.
Myra teaches
We
it.
just put.
And Zanina Myra was at the first
It was such a
base.
success last year. Now they have paid positions for that.
Oh, wait.
And my friends are actually.
We should share the live stream. That's true.
But we got the program started. And now that I'm here, so I stay involved.
Yeah.
Grad school is not different. Plus, you can't really stay involved. How can you explain your friends? Do you not have any trouble all the time?
Slowly bring them on board.
I mean,
I convinced my mom
I
to start
get this
voting
from
for
my
me.
dad. Right now. It's like,
Okay.
he was pretty active in social stuff when he was in Punjab in the 80s and 90s.
Okay.
But I guess there's some valid concerns, like, you know,
Don't get
in my
arrested.
experience, especially, it already kind of puts me in disadvantage in the job market to an extent. They understand they just don't get involved in something that might bring me up negatively. I mean, there was like a complaint lodged against me because I was acting the usage like that.
Right, me too.
It was kind of silent complaint, not official. The chancellor's office. hello. Let's just say like things didn't happen, but nothing that I can move on and they can do it. I did it, so nothing happened. I'm just saying like it does come at a cost. Especially since people
Let's start
I always thought this.
Let's start when Kavneet gets in here.
I go next circle.
Do you have his contact?
At least before I can understand what's going on.
Yeah. Hold up.
Yeah, this contact.
No offense, but I couldn't do it myself. Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? No, this is that. Over and over. How does it make any picture? It doesn't even have to.
Yeah.
Hold on. Okay, probably. Wait. Okay, so link to now one more group. Focus on his.
Hi. I won't judge you because I showed you.
You know you live in.
No, I don't.
You moved.
I still don't realize. I'm at 9.
I was gonna send you a funny email.
Okay.
Well, I sent you one email, but I was gonna
I
send you
saw.
a funny email.
All right. So let's see. We got.
Hold on. I've been operating under a hold.
What are you looking
Where is our live stream thing?
It's
I mean, oh,
it's on a different window.
yeah. That's. There we go. Okay.
That's awkward. Hi.
Alright, so should we start
One of us might say something. Don't repeat that as
Every
me.
time.
Okay.
We get people.
Let that be.
Alright. An hour, 4 minutes, or?
Yeah, I think this is a good enough group right now, so we'll just start with introduction. Okay. What?
We have our national.
Oh, cool. Are they coming? It's hard for me to put down inside the organization.
Oh, I can't imagine.
What are we gonna do?
Yeah, he must be all over the place.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. We'll start in a few minutes.
Let's do some guess for some of the Well, come on. Hi everybody. Welcome to our SALDEF event, Islamophobia in the aftermath of 9/11. My name is Susan.
My name is Zane.
And, first I just want to say there's been a lot of holidays, so Eid Mubarak, Happy Navratri, Durga Puja, and all that. So let's first describe the event to you. Sorry about the hard slow. Okay. So this panel discussion will discover what people of South Asian, Desi, Southwest Asian, North African, SWANA, Middle Eastern, and those who come from Muslim backgrounds went through. Discussions will range from murders of innocent Sikhs, Muslims, Hindus, etc., as acts of revenge for the 9/11 attacks, to bullying and to discrimination.
Our panelists are Zahra Billoo from Council on American-Islamic Relations and Kavneet Singh from Sikh American Legal Defense and Education Fund. And this event is co-sponsored by the Sikh Student Association, the Muslim Students Association, Students for Justice in Palestine, the Afghan Student Association, and Student Coalition for San Jose State Accountability.
All right. And now we're going to talk about our panelists. I guess I'll talk about Kavneet Singh first, because sorry, I have a very slow cell phone. So just a little bit of Kavneet Singh, some information I pulled out from SALDEF. Kavneet Singh is a senior manager with CAIR Permanente, where his responsibilities relate to performance management and strategy development. Singh has brought, sorry, my phone. Singh has brought these skills to SALDEF, advising on strategy, advising on SALDEF's interactive curriculum, Sikhism 101 for law enforcement, assisting in training local, state, and federal law enforcement officials about awareness and protocol, and addressing audiences about Sikhism, the Sikh American community, civil rights, and diversity at regional and national forums. Singh also serves as a member of the Diversity Advisory Council for the Health Plan and on the advisory board of the Prison Religion Project at St. Mary's College. He has been actively involved with various Sikh youth camps across the country over the past decade and instructed students in Sikh history and ethos at the El Sobrante Gurdwara. Singh received his BA from the University of California, Berkeley.
Go Bears.
Aggies.
You guys are our farming schools.
Highlanders, EC Riverside. Now, if only I could pull up information about Zahra Billoo. My apologies.
I have her bio memorized.
Hey, give it a go then.
Please don't do that.
All right. So I'm sorry about this. Just apologies, it's not so fluent today. This one right here. Yeah.
All right. As Executive Director of CAIR, San Francisco Bay Area, Zahra Billoo strives to promote justice and mutual understanding. Zahra joined CAIR San Francisco Bay Area in 2009 and immediately embraced her roles as community organizer and civil rights advocate. She frequently provides trainings at mosques and universities as part of CAIR's efforts to empower the community while building bridges with allies on civil rights issues. Zahra also represents victims of discrimination and advocates for policy changes that uphold civil rights for all.
So, again, welcome Kavneet Singh and Zahra Billoo. Rock, paper, scissors, one who gets to go first?
Yeah, I was going to shoot for it, but she didn't want to. So.
Well, I mean, he was late. So.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Right.
I was going to go under the old ladies first attitude. So, what do I want to talk about? That's a great question. Let me do one thing too. I have a couple things I want to talk about that are sort of both, I think, new from the issues that matter to our communities, the post 9/11 communities, the Mensa communities, however we want to call ourselves this year. There's also probably some old things that I want to talk about of what have we seen over the last 10, 12 years, post 9, well, almost 13 years, excuse me, post 9/11. But then I think with the group size that we have too, let's ask questions, let's talk about stuff. I personally don't want to talk for 30 minutes. Zahra may or may not want to talk that long. And that wasn't a judgment, that was merely just a question.
Okay.
I don't want to get accused of being.
We get along.
Yeah.
This is normal.
It'll be interesting, actually, what happens. We tend to get remarkably flippant as we get into our conversation. So feel free, social media folks, if you guys want to tweet something, say something that we're saying, feel free.
You're on live stream too.
Awesome. That's great. Hello to the interwebs. But what I would say is take context into it. Sometimes, especially Zahra and I, tend to be a little flippant about certain things. And so understand not all of that's serious. So for example, Susan sent an email about one of the things that we could think about and how, and I think one of the unfortunate characterizations of CAIR and kind of their connections to, or false connections to,
Terrorist groups.
yeah, I just didn't want to say it, but all right, fair enough. And so she sent that, like, what's the danger of that? And my initial response was, yeah, okay, that's a great point. Then my second response was, wait, CAIR isn't affiliated with terrorist groups? When did that happen? But again, completely flippant because I know Zahra. We can say those things to each other. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, I think, obviously as a Sikh, I'll speak to the Sikh perspective. And I think then I'll end a little bit with sort of where are we as a community, both as Sikhs and as a broader post-9/11 community, about what we should be doing and what are the dangers that are out there. I mean, if there's questions, comments, things that require clarity, shoot your hand up. Don't worry about it. Don't worry until I finish, or if there seems like a logical place for me to stop, just ask questions. I think that's a much more valid response, or a much more valid use of our time. Sound cool? Fair? Awesome. So I think 9/11 really served for the Sikh community as a very watershed moment. That you look at post 9/11 and pre 9/11, the community's perspective on things are very different. And actually even segments of the community were created post 9/11 that weren't there 13 years ago. If I look back to the Sikh community when I was in college, which was when the attacks happened and I was on the Cal campus, I can remember very few folks doing the type of work that CAIR and SALDEF and other orgs are doing. Very few folks doing that. Very few folks even caring about the type of work that these two orgs are doing. And I think that in and of itself is actually a really landmark change in our communities. That there is a realization that, wow, this hatred, wow, these social circumstances really are real. And are very much here and not going away. If you look at the history of the kind of the Sikh community in this country, with the first migrations happening somewhere around the late 1890s, there's really cool history that's coming out of UC Davis, the Roots and Sand project that shows some pictures, maybe 1870s. I actually saw a picture, not authentic, I don't know what it is, but pretty amazing, of a Sikh at a Civil War reunion. And so folks that fought in the Civil War had a reunion. I think it was in the South also, which is another reason to be a little dubious. But nonetheless, you saw a Sikh potentially have fought in the Civil War for this country. So pretty remarkable history that we potentially have here. Throughout that history, though, you saw that, especially I think post-1965, so this is really the elimination of the Asian Exclusion Acts, so that you saw Sikhs could come over, were able to hold different jobs other than just being laborers. The first migrants, really that first, let's say 1900 and 1965, really more specifically subjugated to labor jobs. So whether it was working on the lumber mills in Oregon, the railroads with our Chinese brothers and sisters, really forgotten part of California history, that Sikhs hand in hand worked to build the railroads, to then I think something that our history has, and we still continue to do, working at the farms up and down the Central Valley. So you saw that Sikhs were basically dedicated to those three labor markets, and more importantly, they weren't allowed to bring their wives. So you had many Sikhs who would come as young men, or even as slightly older professionals who would come here. These are the jobs they had. And so you see this really beautiful history in some ways of a Sikh, let's call him Avtad Singh, marrying Isabel Garcia. And so their kids then have this beautiful Sikh and Hispanic history. So you'll see the daughter might be Maria Singh Garcia. So a generation, 2 generations down, they still maybe have that connection to Sikhism, to Punjab, but in reality everything else has probably gone away. So an actually really very neat history that's in California specifically, that little by little now is being discovered. You see very cool cool family lineages, that a completely Hispanic family on the surface, but then you go into their house and you'll see a gentleman with a turban. Whoa, what the heck is that? And like, oh yeah, this is my great grandfather. They're like, wait a minute, but you're and he's, oh yeah. So the history of the community has this neat arc. But post-65, I think you really saw the community come here, and very much in the similar ways that I think many minorities, people of color, having come to this country. You look to establish yourself. So many of them came as graduate students. My dad came here 1970 as a PhD student. A year later, my brother and my mom followed. I think that's sort of the similar arc you see post-65. That many of the people who came here were looking for the American dream, right? To better themselves, maybe even go back. I think that was definitely not out of the equation at that time. And they came, and their jobs really nose of the grindstone. We're going to study really hard. We're going to do well. We're going to make sure our kids have the opportunity to study in America. That was it. Those are the 3 rules. Nothing else really outside of those existed. Then all of a sudden it was, oh, you know, we got to make sure our kids have some sort of connectivity to culture. How do we do that? And then you saw the beginning and continuing still even today of the establishment of gurdwaras, or Sikh places of congregational worship, spread up all across the country. And so these are the things that really the community focused on. Then the 70s and 80s came, and you saw tensions in the Middle East. You might see wars in certain regions, obviously Gulf War I, Gulf War II, then the attacks of 9/11. That you saw that up to the attacks of 9/11. Let's stop right there. And you saw these spikes in incidents that happened against all of our communities. But of course the Sikh community as well, being outwardly the most visible, right, of that our unique identity makes us look like this sort of demonized other. And you saw these spikes in issues of, specifically probably related to violence. We don't really have good data, obviously, from the 70s and 80s, but anecdotally what we see is, yeah, there were probably a lot of instances of job discrimination, because what were the laws like back then, and who was going to enforce it, to bullying against children. I grew up during the 90s, so I definitely remember, not necessarily, I think, being smart enough to connect, oh, this is happening and this is why I'm getting threatened at school. But in retrospect, yeah, there probably was a lot of that. And I imagine many of you can remember those things from the 90s and the 2000s even. And then finally, that the community still was very, very insular. And it wasn't that they had distrust for anybody, and it wasn't that they disliked anyone. It was just, you know, we got to focus on our own development. 9/11, though, turned that switch. That all of a sudden, we realized we can't be insular. And regardless of whether we are cab drivers, whether we are blue-collar workers, whether we're white-collar workers, whether we are, you know, living in the gated communities, or the most pristine gated communities of San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, ultimately, hate can touch us wherever we are. And violence can touch us wherever we are. And that was a really different thing. I think the whole model minority myth, for lack of a better way to frame it, or the fact that affluence should give you some protection, that was shattered. Because it turns out, hey, wherever I am, maybe I can control who I'm interacting with. So we see the brunt of violence today that happens against the community typically is against still folks that are working in service industries, right? Because they don't have any control over who's interacting with them. Whereas if I'm a physician or I'm a businessman, I probably have some bit of filter of who gets to come into my office. But 9/11 changed that. And so we began to see the development of more organizations. So for the Sikh community, SALDEF, at the time SMART, was the only Sikh organization in existence. But in the aftermath of 9/11, you saw the coalescing, the starting of other organizations in New York, even here in the Bay Area, that some are still around, some aren't. But you saw this energy of folks who were in their college years, or maybe even growing up to that time, and young professionals. So college, young professionals, and folks maybe in junior high, high school even, beginning to see that, oh man, this is what we've got to do as a community. That it's great that we've developed a social structure, it's great that we've developed cultural and religious institutions, but we've got to develop other institutions to begin to move our community forward. And we've got to be able to begin engaging. Our voice is only as strong as just our voice, unless we tap into our sister and brother organizations, unless we tap into even going beyond that, a Pan-Asian movement. I think one of the first allies that came out after 9/11 in support of all our communities were our brothers and sisters in the Japanese-American community. Specifically the JCL, were such strong proponents and friends of ours in those immediate days and weeks after the attacks. And exemplified by, I think, two leaders that both came out of San Jose, Secretary Mineta and Congressman Mike Honda, who both were interned, both saw what the threat of this other can do to this country, and wanting to make sure it didn't happen again. Which is why, Secretary Mineta, in the immediate aftermath, with his leadership around airport security, Mike Honda, I think, continues to be a good friend of the communities. So we see that need to engage, that need to come out of our enclaves, come out of our insular shells, and really be involved in general civic discussion, being civically engaged, making sure that we are working with other orgs on issues that are important. That very much was because of 9/11. So I think not to say that making lemonade out of lemons, but very much that you saw this as a wake-up call for the community. That realizing both this was something we had to do, and I think for the Sikhs in the room, this is also something that's very much in our history and in our DNA, that we had just sort of put aside for a little while. Standing up for issues that are right, of being on the side of maybe what's not always popular, but being on the side of what's morally right. And that's what you can see now with issues around profiling, with even the Washington football team name. Sikh voices coming out talking about these issues that are just wrong, and making sure that our voice is part of the civil rights discourse, but also that we have a Sikh voice talking about these issues. So yeah, I have a couple other things I want to talk about. I think, one thing that we saw both post 9/11 and probably still continue to see today is failures of the media. Post 9/11, all of you probably have smartphones, so feel free to look it up now or afterwards. Look up Singh and Amtrak, S-H-E-R, first name, last name S-I-N-G-H, and then Amtrak as in the train. So you'll see within the first hours after the attacks, Singh was on an Amtrak train, I think coming down from Rhode Island to DC. He'd heard of the attacks, he's a technologist, consultant, he was coming home. He was pulled off a train, his face was blasted on every news channel. This guy was arrested, suspicious looking figure, suspect individual, whatever it might have been. And Cher looked just like me. Actually, Cher probably looked a little bit more like you. Beard open, totally professional looking guy. And they pulled Cher off a train, and his face was flashed across at every single image. No context, nothing given, except like, this is the guy we took off a train. Oh, by the way, 3 hours ago, we were attacked in the greatest attack against our country in recent history. And oh, by the way, we've also condemned for Osama bin Laden and his followers, who coincidentally look like Singh. So Cher was cleared about 2 hours later. He had a kirpan, which for the Sikhs is the small religious sword that they wear. They cleared him, they put him back on the train. Not a single media outlet, though, said, oh yeah, we put this guy back on a train, he was fine. They were really quick to show his face, but as soon as this incident got cleared up, didn't say, oh yeah, hey, our bad. I think another failure of the media and of the administration at the time as well was President Bush at the time really quick to say, hey, look, we're coming together as Americans. Hey, look, everything's going well. We're not reacting out. I think anybody who knows anything about these issues knows that that was 100% false. Now, maybe he wanted to present that image, or maybe he wanted to encourage us or inspire us to get there. But his failure there, and the media's failure in projecting what his story and not showing what really was going on, was the fact that our fellow Americans didn't realize the name of attack, of misplaced anger, of physical assaults, of verbal assaults, of everything you can think of, was actually reaching this crescendo. So again, failures of the media really to say, oh look, you know what? This is what a Sikh looks like, this is what a Muslim looks like, just so you know. But two, don't attack folks who are here. What you're doing is kind of misguided patriotism, is really just bigotry. That you're attacking folks who've already gotten attacked. They're Americans too. On September 11th, they got attacked, and now you're attacking them a second time. How simple of a message they could have conveyed, and how maybe tragic things they could have stopped. So much so tragically, then 4 days later, Mesa, Arizona, the first hate crime death we saw of Billoo Singh Sordi. So just by quick show of hands, how many of you have heard that name? Okay. So, and it's nothing to feel bad about. Sorry, that wasn't a pop quiz. Another name to look up, Billoo, B-A-L-B-I-R, Singh Sordi, S-O-D-H-I. So Billoo, sorry, I use a more definitive term for him. I knew his family, and I know his brothers and his other brother who we lost a couple years later. Small business owner, he and his brother had a combination of convenience stores and restaurants in the Mesa in Phoenix, Arizona. Was outside and was tending to his garden and shot by a gentleman by the name of Frank Rourke on September 15th, 4 days after the attacks in Mesa. Billoo died later that day, but how many people saw that image? How powerful would it have been if NBC News says, and we have the first hate crime slain as a result of these attacks, and you show his image. Yet the media, again, failed to talk about this, failed to present it, and by proxy perpetuated that, oh, it was probably okay for that to happen. Frank Rourke, when he was taken away and arrested, said, go ahead and arrest me and let these terrorists run free. Right, so this type of bigotry could have been helped. I don't want to say eliminated because that's probably really pie in the sky. But this type of bigotry could have been stopped in some smaller way if the media had actually been a little more responsible. Got 3 more points? 3 more points. So we talked a little bit earlier about school bullying, and I'll revisit that really quickly just because I know CAIR, I think, has a specific interest in this, so do we at SALDEF, around understanding the effects of school places and what's happening there. So there's 2 dynamics. The first is material that's actually in schools. So you have information in textbooks, whether it's history books, social studies books, that talks about whether it's Sikhs, Arabs, Muslims, people from the Middle East, whatever, with some connotations of backwardism, being archaic, disrespect for women, or just flat out wrong things around the histories. So for the Sikhs, for example, there's a lot of bad history around the events surrounding the, we'll call it the militancy movement in India and in the Punjab, specifically in the 80s and 90s. So very, very wrongly critical and inaccurate information that's there that, again, you give to a 5th grader, a 6th grader, a 7th grader, that this is when their decisions are made. This is when their impressions are made. And I'll talk a little bit more about unconscious bias later, but this is where unconscious bias happens. It happens at this young age, that all of a sudden then you see somebody who looks like me, you see the brother here with the scarf, and you think, oh man, this guy's got to be crazy. This guy's got to be wily, right? He's probably going to talk to me about something around Israel creating apartheid. Whoa, 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 what's going on? As your shirt said too, right?
Yeah. And he will talk to you about that.
I set you up for it. I want to give you a shout out for it. Right, so you have these unconscious biases that are made at this very young age. So that's one piece of it. The second piece, though, is actually the harassment, bullying, physical assaults, taunting, and absolute fear that our kids live in on a day-to-day basis. So obviously that has a couple different effects. One is nobody should really have to deal with that at that young of an age. At any age, let me take it back, especially in schools. The responsibilities of teachers and administrators is to make sure that students have a safe environment to learn. Well, being bullied, being terrorized, that's exactly what it is. Right? I think we're hesitant to use the word terrorism when it deals with other things, but these kids are being terrorized. This has a hugely deleterious effect both on them and the community, because all of a sudden I have really smart kids sitting in school who aren't living up to their potential. And maybe they're afraid to study for their math exam or their spelling exam or history test or whatever it might be. And they're not living up to that potential, so they actually can't be who they want to be. So it hurts me because I'm seeing a young kid not being able to grow up to be the person he or she can be, but I'm also seeing that the community is potentially losing viable leaders and viable folks who can be part of this discourse going forward. So there's a report that we released with Stanford University last year called Turban Myths. Get it? Turban Myths versus Urban Myths.
Oh, I love it.
I didn't come up with that, so I can't. So you can check this out on our website, www.saldef.org. It might even be hashtag Turban Myths, but it'll be on the front page. And so in this research, what we wanted to look at was, we've really been able to tell that, yeah, there's a lot of issues that the community faces. Is it workplace discrimination? Is it hate crimes? Is it bad legislation? Is it school bullying? Whatever it might be. But we've never really done, or excuse me, take a step back. We know that these things all exist, but we don't really have a real reason of why. And I think Zahra, myself, others in the field will probably be able to give you a decent enough answer, but we've never really had, for those of you in business, talk about market research. So we've never really had true market research about what are the things that set people off? What are the things about us as a community that make them not like us? And so we worked with researchers at Stanford, and another public policy think tank to begin to develop the first research and assessment of the identity of Sikhs in this country. And so what we found was pretty striking. First, when shown a picture of somebody like me, 70% of Americans couldn't identify me as a Sikh. Now, I think that number is actually way too low. The way we did this, I actually think it accesses people who probably had more education and more access to certain things. But even then, let's just take it as where it is. Almost 3/4 of the country can't identify as Sikh if shown a picture. Another 70%, when asked about what faith is most associated with turbans and beards, didn't mention Sikhs. So again, the only faith that has turbans and beards mandated as part of the faith. Then we asked a question around, when you see somebody that looks like a Sikh, if you've ran into a stranger, what would your emotional state be? And almost 1/4 of the people then talked about how they would feel apprehensive or angry when seeing somebody that looks like me. So pretty startling results. And we began to realize then this is the way that we can now take research and begin to reframe what it means to be a Sikh in America, but also reframe what it means, what the identity means to our fellow Americans. So with that, after Turban Meds, one of the biggest pieces of work we've done after that was earlier this year we released a public service announcement about Sikhs. So that was aired on Comcast's network of channels for about 2 months. How many of you saw the PSA, maybe online or on TV even? Awesome, one of the 6, that's great. So, you know, check out YouTube. You can just type in probably Sikh PSA. You can type in SALDEF PSA. You'll get, there's a bunch of press that came out of it. I think the online hits and the access points were something about 100 million access points of, including the PSA as well as articles that were read. So really to begin to shape what the identity was and to show people that as a Sikh, I can be a law enforcement officer, I can be a Boy Scout, I can be a mother, a father. And that makes me a Sikh, but that also very much is part and parcel of what makes me an American. So some of you may know Waris Alawalia. And so Waris was the narrator and also kicked off and ended the PSA. So that was pretty awesome. He's obviously riding high with his career, with the Gap commercial, or the Gap ad, excuse me. So Waris was super excited to do it. I think lent us a huge amount of credibility as well there too. And the cool thing is we found a great partner. So we talked earlier about being engaged in the community. We found a great partner in Comcast who dedicated $2 million of free airtime for us and actually funded the PSA. All because, you know, I think they're a relatively responsible company. They actually, I think everybody talks about diversity and we want to be diverse and we want to help promote diversity. But on the same token, they actually put their money where their mouth is. And so they dedicated money both to the filming of the PSA and, like I said, over $2 million to show it on their network of television stations. So it was awesome. We got Twitter, email, Facebook response being like, oh, I just saw this on Bravo during Ted Gunn's show. And I'm like, okay, that's awesome. Or, you know, I saw this on VH1, or I saw this on USA, or wherever it might have been. And it's great. And non-Sikhs telling us. Like, it was cool when Sikhs told us that, okay, great, look, we're proving we did it. But when non-Sikhs got it, it was awesome. Because the outpouring of support and warmth that we got was amazing. Like, oh, man, you guys are totally actually part of the community. Wow, I never knew this much about your community. This is wonderful. I looked at your website and learned so much. This is great. We had one in Colorado Springs, actually, where a woman reached out. She connected with one of our leadership program alums, and they did a whole kind of visiting the Gurdwara and meeting the communities. So they had in Colorado Springs, so for those of you who don't know, both Olympic Training Ground as well as Air Force Base, that we had a huge discourse happen there with the communities. So that's huge. Beyond getting awareness, we actually created a cycle of engagement. About Turban Meds again. One of the other things we added was there's a really cool, there's a couple cool pieces of research actually in here, but the one I'll focus on is specifically about first-person shooter games. So everybody familiar what that means? So basically it's, you know, like we're playing, like, don't even know what, I'm going to say Duck Hunt because that's what I played as a kid, but that doesn't count.
I know that game too.
But any of these kind of like Call of Duty or any type of video games we play where you are trying to shoot whoever the evil folks are. That they basically did a variety of tests and determined that folks were more likely to shoot someone who had a turban or had a beard and was holding a can of Coke versus a Caucasian who held a gun. So pretty remarkable research that was done that, again, shows, I think, the issue that our communities have to face. It's not just, and it's multifaceted, right? It's skin color, it's facial hair, it's head coverings, whether it's turbans, hijab, whatever it might be. So check out the research in that. It's really interesting, but I think it speaks to this unconscious bias that we talked about a few minutes back around kids and when do they get it. And this is that same thing. And there's a huge industry out there about this, so I think this is something that we're really interested in exploring. At the professional level, diversity training is all about unconscious bias. That if you hire somebody and you have the exact same resumes of somebody who's African American, let's say their name is Jamal Jones, versus somebody who is Michael Smith and is Caucasian, the exact same resumes, you saw that Michael Smith got called back 50% more. So 50% more, that's pretty haunting numbers. And if you apply that then to the same context, you see that unconscious bias really, we all have it. It's not as though just white people have it. That's not fair at all. I have it, absolutely. Everybody has it. But I think the important piece is how do we look at it and how it affects our communities. Then the final piece I'll talk about is, and some of you may have seen this just recently, September 20th, I want to say, that Fox News on one of their weekend shows had an individual come on and was advocating for racial profiling, which basically, everybody who is in law enforcement comes out against, more or less. Like, obviously, there's some folks who supported the NYPD, amongst others, but you see that professional law enforcement experts are coming out saying, look, racial profiling at the end of the day doesn't really work. It's not a sane and useful tactic. We need to get away from it. So he came out and not only argued for racial profiling, specifically of the Mensa communities and the Muslim and Arab communities specifically too, but doubled down on it and mentioned that, in the last war that we won, we monitored and interned the Japanese. So we should be doing very similar things now. So I'll take a step back from that and let that percolate with you all for about 10 seconds. Now, what did he just compare the Muslims and the Arabs and the Sikhs and the Desis to? That there's a war with us against them. Secondly, he called for saying that internment was a good idea, even though the U.S. Congress in 1988 realized that they had screwed up and shouldn't have done that and apologized formally. So I think we still sort of have this, there's this voice out there that's still very loud. Regrettably, kind of Fox News gives them the megaphone to shout it from the hilltops from. But we still very much have a number of issues to talk to. And I think I wanted to highlight this because to showcase that, one, again, bringing it back to sort of the history of our country has that with the internment of our Japanese brothers and sisters in the 40s and 50s. Well, the 40s, excuse me. And kind of I think Zahra and I have talked about this both jokingly and seriously in the past that, hey, do we get there again? What does it take for us to get there again? I think all of us in this room would probably say, nah, that probably wouldn't happen.
I wouldn't say that.
But why wouldn't it? Right? Like, what? In some ways, it's almost a what if. What would have to happen for it to happen again? Sorry.
I feel like it's ongoing. If you look at the incarceration of Black and brown people in this country, like that's an ongoing and continuous form. Like war on specific populations of people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Ferguson, right? I mean, great example right there. And I think one of the cool things about our communities is that you see now a new generation of advocates, of folks doing this now full-time, or at least being exposed to it a great deal, and seeing us stand up for other issues too. So, like this racial profiling issue, I was so proud of our organization for not only coming out for it, but actually, so Talking Points Memo is one of the more widely read kind of policy websites in the country. And Talking Points came to us and said, hey, do you want to write about this? And we're like, hell yeah, we want to write about this. And we'd already actually started writing something, and we're going to probably put it on HuffPo or somewhere else. And we got huge awareness of this issue because of that. And similarly, I think the Washington football team issue of coming out, you're seeing diverse communities coming together, and specifically our Mensa communities, talking about issues that matter that aren't just affecting us. I think that's sort of a critical thing, that our voices now are part of the broader civil rights discourse in this country. And that's a direct result of 9/11. I think if 9/11 had happened, you probably wouldn't see at least the number of voices that we have. Well, let me rephrase it. You definitely would not see the number of voices that we have, but you probably also wouldn't see them as strongly voicing other issues that are maybe tangentially related to us, or on the other side of that, not related to us at all, but very clearly civil rights issues. Voting rights is a great example there too. Yeah, I think that's kind of what I wanted to say. Quick questions, comments before I pass it on to my very distinguished sister to the left. Cool, thank you.
Stage left, my left, your left. Thanks all for being here. I know Abdul Hamid left, but he's the only one I know. But I imagine several of you were there. I just want to say congratulations to the folks who attended the first meeting of the Students for Justice in Palestine. Really exciting that organization. And so, yeah, and that's one of the organizations I think across the country that has seen pushback. So to see it coming into our neighborhood is great, and I anticipate you all keeping the civil rights orgs around you very busy. The thing that, and I apologize, I've been recovering from a cold / whatever's going around, and so a little lower than usual, but the thing that I wanted to start on actually was to go back a couple of decades before 9/11, a few decades, and just remind us that what Muslims, Sikhs, and others are facing today is not new, has been experienced by so many other communities before, whether we're talking about Japanese Americans during World War II with the internment camps, and remembering that even though Congress apologized, that Supreme Court decision permitting them to go forward is still on the books, right? It was actually a lower court that said there was a mistake, but Supreme Court decision stands. And then the targeting of folks who were accused or believed to be communist or communist-leaning or communist-supporting during the Cold War. A lot of times when we talk about racial profiling and religious profiling, we limit it to that, and I think it's really important to bring in political profiling, right? The targeting of people who have maybe unpopular political beliefs, and that's really important for me as a Muslim because the Muslim community is so diverse that I can't always just say it's racial profiling when it's a white Muslim who is being targeted by maybe white institutions or the powers that be, and so that gets complicated, but also keeping in mind that the more broadly that we draw our alliances and the more broadly that we can make those comparisons and learn from history, the more we can work together. And then of course not forgetting, as was mentioned, the African Americans and Latinos during the war on drugs, that you really just had to look around. That's where Driving While Black came up. And so much of the law enforcement tactics that we're seeing targeting the community today were developed and created during so many of those court fights remain ongoing. And as a side note, the thing I did want to make sure to is voters, when you're qualified to vote, please register and vote. And if you are voting, make sure you vote yes on hopefully decriminalize some of the nonviolent, or at least lessen the penalties of some of the nonviolent crimes that many people are really can help. It's cheaper to go to law school than it is to go to jail. You're paying a lot, $60,000 to go to jail. It's I think somewhere around 45. And choices also where people are ending up, how much that's costing. You can talk about pre-9/11, the Iraq War, and then 9/11. So I wanted to talk a little bit about 2006 to today and what we've seen since then. Post 9/11, everyone would agree, watershed moment for our community. One, it became very normal and acceptable to target Muslims. So much of what was done quietly or maybe in a less popular context pre-9/11 was acceptable. Elected officials could get away with targeting Muslims. The media could make non-television. And let's face it, we know that Iraq and Afghanistan had to other anyone that looked like anyone that was connected to people to continue to fund people abroad. Endless, right? That's what it takes. It's also the connection, by the way, between the targeting of the other people. That a lot of times the war on drugs is impacted by our relationship with South America and Mexico and the drug trade that happens to those countries. Our targeting of people that are allegedly reported very much influenced by the Cold War. And then, of course, Japanese Americans being interned has to do with us being at war with Japan and needing to other those people. But from 2002 to 2006, it starts, I don't want to say it gets better, but people start to understand what is going on. Groups like CAIR are getting stronger and larger. SALDEF is getting stronger and larger. Other allied groups are coming to the forefront. These conversations are being had. Allies have opportunities to come forward. And the Muslim community itself, the Muslim and Sikh community itself are also saying, hey, like, we have to take ownership of our narrative. This idea that we came over here to achieve the American dream, and that meant that we weren't going to say anything when Cops was a really popular show in the 80s and 90s, when African Americans and Latinos were treated as guilty until proven innocent, when folks were being sort of shepherded through the injustice system simply, again, because of their skin color, that wasn't going to work. And so these communities, the Amemsa, Masa, however we want to call them, communities start to say, we have to take ownership of our civil rights, of our narrative. We have to build alliances. We can't just expect that other people will stand for us when we won't stand for them. And I'll talk a little bit about the way interfaith tends to happen in some of our communities. But things are getting slightly better. And then 2008 sees the election of President Barack Hussein Obama, who, if the standard for a good Muslim president is one who kills lots of Muslims, he is excelling at that. But he is not Muslim. He says he is not Muslim. It's not my place to judge his faith. He says he is not Muslim. I'm pretty sure he's attended church more than mosque in his time in office. But yes, those could be political decisions. Those of us that were holding out hope that he might be Muslim maybe lost it when he started drone bombing Pakistan. But also when, in his second inauguration, he didn't just come out as a Muslim. Because if that was the time to do, if there was a time to do it, that was the time. We were all just sitting around hoping that he would come out and confess to being Muslim because he'd already been elected a second time. But he didn't, so let's take him at his word. However, it is not as acceptable to critique him for being African American as it is to critique him for being Muslim, right? People are, at least today, somewhat ashamed of being anti-black racist. Anti-Muslim discrimination, a lot more acceptable. And so it's fascinating to me that even after 6 years of, again, him continuing George W. Bush's tradition of bombing Muslim-majority countries to smithereens, of bombing, or of drone bombing American citizens who are Muslim abroad without any due process, and the list goes on of all of the various things he's done. His Justice Department continues to send informants into mosques, and so on. There are still a significant portion of Americans who believe that he is a secret Muslim. Now, why the most powerful man in possibly the world would keep his faith a secret baffles me. But his election made it acceptable to target Muslims again because we could not have an American Muslim president. And it was fascinating to see that kind of bigotry, that the silence around that bigotry came from both the right and the left. And so as much as I love to bash Fox News, I think it's also important to keep in mind that CNN, MSNBC, and so many of these other networks are also really problematic. And I'll talk about how we engage them in a little bit. And so you saw an increase in hate crimes and Islamophobia across the country. There was also, by the way, between 2008 and 2010, a rash of attacks on mosques and gurdwaras. And so, and then again in when was Wisconsin? 2013? 2012. And so it continued, but 2008 to 2010 really kicked it off. Many have theorized that it started with the Ground Zero mosque that was neither a mosque nor a Ground Zero, but as a result of the normalization of targeting that community center, we saw mosques in California, mosques in Tennessee, temples in Wisconsin, and across the country being attacked in very violent ways, reminiscent. I'm always careful of drawing too close comparisons to what African Americans face because the struggle is different, and ours, I would argue, is far less severe even today than theirs was in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and throughout American history, but reminiscent of the attacks on churches that many saw 50 to 60 years ago. And the challenge with this, as with any discriminatory actions, behaviors, and violence, is that it never just impacts the one person, it impacts the entire community. you also saw many elected officials running on anti-Muslim platforms, and so attempting to use anti-Muslim bigotry to earn points in their political races. And so whether it was Congressman Peter King saying, I'm going to hold hearings on the radicalization of Muslims, or people in South Carolina where maybe there are 10 Muslims. I'm sure there's more than 10 Muslims. There's probably 15 Muslims and 15 Sikhs. But running on anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant agendas.
There are Sikhs in South Carolina.
It's like 15, 20.
The governor. Former Sikh.
There's a university there, so there's
Okay.
A Sikh. She's not Christian.
No judgment. And so keeping in mind that this is going on across the country, and so we actually saw a rise in anti-Muslim sentiment, a rise in Islamophobia, and unfortunately, a lot of people hoped and theorized that the war on terror would come to an end once we conquered Iraq and we conquered Afghanistan and we conquered the Taliban. But more recently, we've seen the rise in sort of theories, fears, and attacks around groups like ISIS, right? ISIS, ISIL, they go by a bunch of other names that I won't say, but folks that are at one point were from the, I want to say, the rebellious or the anti-government groups in Syria and Iraq, but have now become sort of these multinational terrorist organizations making demands that the U.S. stop bombing their countries. And while the U.S. refuses to stop bombing their countries, they are beheading Westerners. And so how that plays into anti-Muslim sentiment here. Glenn Greenwald's done a lot of really great work about looking at the way mainstream media is fed stories by allegedly anonymous government officials who then want to put forward narratives. Again, demonizing many parts of the other world, make it possible for us to continue bombing them, make it possible for us to push forward our foreign policy. And that's not to say that what groups like ISIS and ISIL are doing are not terrorism. They are. But how, moving forward to the challenges, one of the challenges that the Muslim community and many minority communities have faced post 9/11, and this is sort of normal for wartime discourse, is how do we have a conversation about the problems with our foreign policy that lead us to the situations that we're in today, whether it's funding Israel and upsetting Palestinians, or funding one group and not the other in Egypt, or funding one group and not the other in Iraq or Syria, and how that goes on, how that brings us to where we are today without walking into the trap of being accused of being unpatriotic or supporting terrorism. Is that it's important to be able to have a conversation about the fact that ISIS is using US-funded weapons to now terrorize Americans, right? And that the concern about Americans going abroad to these countries is so interesting to watch, because in the 70s and 80s it was really celebrated if people went abroad to fight against the Russians, to fight for freedom against the Russians from America. Today, if they're going abroad to fight for freedom against the Syrian government, they're being apprehended at the airport. And rightfully so, because it's against the law. But how do we discuss those laws? And I don't know that I have the answer to that, but I think it's important to say that we need to be open-minded, critical, and nuanced when we're talking about the foreign policy of our government, whether it's President George W. Bush or Barack Obama, or whoever comes after him, and making the connection between how that impacts our civil liberties here and why it is that people everywhere are so upset at our country, right? So I would say that's one piece of it. How do we have it? The second piece of it is the need for American Muslims to come into their identities. So there's always this question of, well, will you condemn ISIS? Will you condemn the Taliban? Will you condemn Osama bin Laden? And for a really long time I said no. Like, I don't know who they are. I have nothing to do with them. I'm not going to condemn that. Like, you don't ask American Jews to condemn Israel. You don't ask American Christians to condemn abortion clinic bombings. Like, you don't ask people to condemn things that are done by people that they are not connected to. And at the same time and again, we were hearing from Americans, from ordinary fellow Americans. We're like, well, where's your condemnation? Like, what does your faith say about this? Those people are out there saying they represent your faith. What will you do? And so I've come around to saying, look, like, if you haven't heard it, it's probably because you don't know how to use Google. But in the meantime, I'm happy to condemn it for you, just so that we're clear on the record that I am not friends with anyone in ISIS. And to be fair, the next piece is about how if you meet anyone from ISIS from San Jose, they're probably not really with ISIS. But that's the second piece, is that it's important for us to recognize as a community and as allies that there are a lot of people who are not familiar with what our faiths teach. And while our textbooks are screwed up, and the mainstream media isn't telling our story, and the government is bombing our people, our brethren abroad, based on a lot of times, a mix of real and false narratives, that we do need to be open about answering questions, that we need to be open about making the condemnations to the extent that people need to hear them. Again, not to say I enjoy the condemnations, right? And I probably wouldn't be doing it if it weren't my full-time gig. But if someone hasn't heard a condemnation, I'm happy to point them to it on Google or tell them, once and for all, that yes, I condemn all violence against innocent people, whether it's by ISIS or ISIL or the Taliban or the U.S. military or the Israeli military, that any violence is okay, or the Ferguson Police Department, right? Like making those connections both locally, nationally, and then internationally. The third piece is how a lot of what goes on abroad is unfortunately used by law enforcement and our governments to further demonize people, right? And so the thing I tell people is that there's very little about law enforcement that I could tell you is a guaranteed fact. But in more than 90% of cases, if you meet someone in San Jose who wants to recruit you for the Taliban or ISIS or any other foreign terrorist group, they're likely not with that foreign terrorist group. They've likely been sent to you by law enforcement to talk to you about joining this group so that they can then catch you on your way to the airport and arrest you and claim a huge victory. Unfortunately, during wartime, law enforcement goes into punishing thought crimes and targeting innocent people so that they can continue to justify their existence, right? So if I continue to arrest terrorists in the United States, then the war on terror can continue. If I can say that I caught 12 Arabs all going to the airport, all trying to join ISIS, in very many cases because someone from the FBI helped them buy their plane ticket, then I can justify racial profiling, right? And if I continue to bomb other countries who then get upset at us and their people bomb us, well, I can continue to fund the military. And so keeping in mind that it's really something that's really important to me as a civil rights attorney is that when you hear about someone that is accused of terrorism or swept up in a terrorism trial, it's really important to read deeply into those stories and figure out where the informants were involved, right? Like whether or not law enforcement played a role. And so a question that I always ask anytime they announce a terrorism arrest is, was this person recruited by law enforcement? And one of the things that we've seen as a problematic trend that doesn't get discussed enough is the targeting of people who have mental health issues. And so there are two pieces to this. The first is that the Patriot Act, the National Defense Authorization Act, the ongoing Islamophobia has impacted people who were borderline paranoid, who were facing borderline mental health issues and really pushed them over the edge, right? And so we've had to deal with situations where someone will come to us and think that law enforcement is following them around, but they have no evidence of it. Law enforcement has made no contact. And so we want to send them to a psychiatrist, to a psychologist, someone that can get them the appropriate help they need because that person doesn't need a lawyer. But law enforcement is actually permitted to get certain records from our psychiatrists, from our mental health professionals. And so how do you comfort someone who's paranoid by telling them that they can seek confidential health advice when they can't, right? When there is a possibility that their records are being sought. So that's the first piece of it. The second piece of it is that many, many informants have targeted people who are mentally unstable. So people who have documented mental health issues, who are low income, who are isolated, alienated from the community. A number of the informants, or a number of the terror suspects, including one in San Jose back in it was February of 2013, had a documented mental health issue. His family had called the law enforcement on him prior when he had an episode, was unemployed, was new to the community, but also not at all engaged in the community. So much so that after they announced his terror arrest, we went out to the community and said, did anyone know him? Because if you did, you're going to get visited by law enforcement. We want to make sure you know your rights, and we couldn't find anyone who knew this person. And in his case, law enforcement went to him, recruited him to join the Taliban, again, in San Jose. So please note that it's the FBI, not the Taliban. Helped him pick out the location to bomb in Oakland. Are you familiar with this case? It was a bank in Oakland. Helped him pick out the location to bomb, helped him pick out the bomb-making materials, helped him build the bomb, and then went with him to blow up the bank, presumably, and when he pushed the button and nothing happened, they arrested him and announced a huge terror arrest. This was a man who would have had no capacity to execute this kind of attack on his own had it not been for law enforcement helping all the way through. So that's the one piece. And then the last piece I want to touch on is media, because it comes up so much. One of the challenges that the Muslim, Sikh, and other minority communities have faced for a really long time is we don't engage the media in a meaningful way. And so in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, when many of our parents were new immigrants, we weren't engaging because we didn't think we needed to. Those were not respectable careers. They did not always pay well. We didn't want our kids to be waiting tables in Hollywood while they, waited for their next big opportunity, and we didn't see the relevance or importance of it. But then along comes 9/11, and it's like, oh wait, we can't just have engineers, doctors, and business owners for all of our professional opportunities and that's not to say that there's anything wrong with engineers, doctors, or business owners, but that we needed more than that, right? That we needed teachers, we needed social workers, we needed media professionals. We needed to normalize the image of American Muslims in two ways: by making sure they were at the decision-making table inside the media outlets, and then also that they were the personalities that were coming through, that they were playing leading roles in Hollywood, that they were your news anchor telling you about the weather and traffic. And so there's been a lot of discourse inside the community and a lot of, I think, development and redirection of young energy to say, go, like we need you in these careers. So that's how we're engaging by participating. There's also sort of the side of it that says, well, there's a lot of conversation that happens in African American, Latino communities, also in Masa and Imamsa communities about, do we engage networks like Fox News or do we boycott entirely? And there are two minds of it, and I don't know that I have a decision entirely, but for me, it's one part of it is you don't want to give a platform to hateful, irresponsible journalists, and so every time we tune into Sean Hannity or Glenn Beck or even some of the problematic shows on MSNBC, we are continuing to give them a platform. They're able to say, I am the largest cable news network in the country because people continue to tune in, and that's not just whether or not you have cable and you turn on the television. It's also every time you give them a hit on YouTube, every time you give them a hit on their website, is that we're feeding into it. So one possibility is ignore it altogether, boycott it, right? Leave it alone, support the media that is good to you. But the other side of that conversation is, as much as I may laugh about it at times, Fox News is the nation's largest cable news network. People are watching it. Those people are likely very much the people that believe that President Barack Obama is a secret Muslim and that we didn't land on the moon and all of these other sort of funny theories that we can laugh at, but people watch it. And so if you can change even one mind, it might be worth it, right? A lot of times we look at Islamophobia, anti-Muslim sentiment, and the right wing generally as a spectrum, as is true for the left wing, is that it's a spectrum. There are people in the middle and people on the far end that I would say can be brought over, that are actually very friendly, that understand civil liberties and government intrusions. And there's a bunch of people that don't want to be brought over, that are anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant, anti-everything. But if you can reach the people that can be, and I hate to say converted to religion up front, so not converted from a faith perspective, but converted in general, right? Help to understand. They've never interacted with a Sikh, they've never interacted with a Muslim, and they see someone on television that they can connect with. Maybe it's worth it. And so that fight hasn't been decided. The thing that we tell people, though, is make sure you support community and local media, whether it's KPFA in Berkeley or there's a local station down here as well. The name escapes me right now, but whether you're supporting local media and also use social media, because you have the opportunity to control the narrative. 20 years ago, if we talked about accessing media or having 15, 20, 50,000 followers, that was something that really only celebrities did. Today, if you tweet enough pictures of your cat, you can influence the world's opinion of other critical issues. So I'll stop there, because I have a cat.
You tweet pictures of your cat?
I do.
Billoo the Billy.
Absolutely. Lucas Fiasco is his name.
Oh.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yes, exactly. Total fangirl status.
Billoo Billy. I love it.
So I stopped there, but I don't know if there's questions for both of us, questions for either. You're also welcome to throw stuff at us. Him, particularly.
Racist of you.
Oh, yeah. Because you're brown.
Well, he mentioned that there were like studies done about like how people perceive the Sikh community and things like that, and how much they can identify them and things. How much is done, studies have done about how they perceive Muslims or Arabs or like Desi? And I mean, I know that there are studies out there, but I just don't feel that it's something that's broadcasted as much either. So like we know that yes, there's racial profiling, but like how severe or like how much of a percent? Because I mean, I know Sikhs are probably not as exposed in the media as much. That's probably why there's very, very high rates of like people just being totally ignorant of what's going on. So I was just wondering if there's similarity or if there's different, if you would know anything.
I would say there's that evokes a couple of things for me. The first that's been really interesting in looking at the difference of civil rights complaints between Sikhs and Muslims, and the one that we looked at last year actually was school bullying, because there have been studies on school bullying as it impacts Sikhs in New York and California, and then also school bullying as it impacts Muslim youth in California. We found higher rates of complaints amongst the Sikh community. And our theory, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, is that because the Muslim community has a lot of people that can quote unquote pass, so like light-skinned Arabs with blonde hair and blue eyes who no one would ever know, or that it becomes that sometimes it's actually easier for Muslims to pass, and so the brunt of civil rights violations is higher in the Sikh community. They stand out more and are more visible. You see that also with just the fact that the first hate crime victim post 9/11 was a Sikh American. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that there are a number of polls out there, mostly by Gallup and Pew, that look at perceptions of American Muslims and ask questions such as, like, would you want an American Muslim as your neighbor? Or would you want an American Muslim to serve in the government? Forget that you're also on web.
I'm hiding my phone. You notice I moved my chair just so.
And like, do you think President Barack Obama is a Muslim? So those studies have been done. One of the challenges with a number of these studies, all of these studies, and tying into the role of the media, is that they don't always get coverage. It's similar to like the condemnation issues. The condemnations have been issued for days. Like there are condemnations that are issued like literally every month by the Muslim community for something new, simply because someone asks, right? Just last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, 120 Muslim scholars from across the world issued a historic letter taking apart the religious arguments of ISIS. So ISIS says, look, we have a religious basis for all the actions. CAIR, Zaytuna College, and folks from across the world issued this letter. It got tiny coverage, right? Like for me, I think the most notable coverage it got was Ben Affleck referenced it when he threw down with Bill Maher, another film. But that's where the responsibility is on us as individuals, as people of conscience, to say, like, as an example, I had no idea that this report existed until today. And I'm on SALDEF's email list, and I know Kavneet, but it's on me then to go out and, well, everything's your fault, to go out and share the news of the report, right, to make sure that my contacts are hearing about it as well. And so I always urge people that when you're in a setting like this, it's not that there's a shortage of experts, advocates, or data, it's that there aren't enough people pushing that information out.
Yeah, I'll just add one piece. Well, two things. One, school bullying, I think a majority of Sikh children are going to be brown-skinned, and for the boys, going to have small turbans. Even for some of our young girls, will have some sort of small turbans. And then I think if they are Caucasians and Sikhs or other kind of skin tones, then they definitely will have turbans, because they're typically conversions into the faith, so then they'll definitely have turbans or some sort of identifying factor. So that, I think you're right on with that. I'll give you one interesting story to look at is Jack Shaheen, who's, if you know anything about the Arab American community, has done a lot of great work, or had done a lot of great work, excuse me. So he did tons of research, and it's called Real Bad Arabs, R-E-E-L. And so this is his work on the depiction of Arabs and people with turbans, basically, in Hollywood and in television and film, specifically. So we use that in our research here as well. It's kind of a jumping off point, too. Great question.
What are some of the...
Sikhs have come over here. What's going on?
What are some of the drives or initiatives that both of the organizations launch separately or together to combat, you can say, let's just start with school bullying. I mean, I know some stuff is being done in Central Valley. There was a board of supervisor meeting like I think a month or two ago.
Yeah.
And some stuff is being done in New York. But unfortunately, outside of these two, you can say relatively liberal states, how are we reaching out to communities, maybe in, you know, in
Fresno.
and yeah, and it in Fresno or Bakersfield. That I mean,
Right.
my point is that
Like how we're reaching out to
yeah,
South Carolina.
yeah, like I'm
Is that
saying
your
that my point is that Sikh Americans or like the minorities in Bay Area tend to be like more, you can say, educated, or like in they tend to have more bachelor's degrees, something like that, than in Bakersfield. So how are we reaching out to how are we reaching out to those marginalized communities inside our own communities?
Yeah.
It's a resource question. Unfortunately, what we've seen is that where resources are concentrated is where the organizations start, where the organizations flourish. So looking at CAIR as an example, like even within the Bay Area, we were started by Silicon Valley tech folks, and so we're based in Santa Clara. The needs are possibly higher in Oakland, but we can't fund a second office in Oakland, right? The needs might be higher in Fresno, Chico, Redding. There aren't even enough people there for it to make sense to necessarily be there full time, but the needs are higher. At least on our end, we actually hired a rural outreach coordinator earlier this year with support from the California Bar Foundation to say, look, like we know that there are civil rights issues that are going unaddressed in some of the more homogenous areas where resources are fewer. And so at the very least, if we can get the word out about the resources, about civil rights information, then those people can maybe call our offices that though are not there, might be willing to help. And it feels like that's true across the country, is that we don't have offices in Kentucky or Georgia or the Carolinas, Dakotas, where you would anticipate that there might be higher needs. So that is a challenge.
Yeah, I think it's dead on, right? That we don't have I think as a community, I'll focus on the Sikh community. I think we have nowhere near probably the resources that the Muslim community does, and they've had orgs for a lot longer. So I think we're still growing up in a lot of ways. So that's part of it. The second, very clearly, is resources. You look at the money that's funneled into the 2, 3, maybe 6 civil rights groups, and it's not $3 million, right? Which is nothing. So part of it's resources. I think in some capacity, I don't know necessarily at the Muslim community, I'd be interested to hear what you have to say, but I think we're seeing, I don't want to say an influx of talent, because that's not at all the case, but it's still sort of the permissibility of, wait, is that something I should really get into? Like, I went to law school. I mean, Zahra's a great example. Like, I went to law school and either paid a lot of money or took a lot of loans, and now I'm kind of working for a nonprofit group. Wait a minute. That's a financial hit. Also, where are like my mom and my dad and all the aunties going to think about me? Like, there's that kind of reality there too. Sorry?
Until they need your help.
Yeah, until they need your help. And then all of a sudden they're like, wow, you guys are doing great work. And I'm like, yeah, thanks. Great. So I think there's that piece of it. One way, and you asked about sort of how are we trying to solve it too. I think one way we're trying to do it is we have a program we started 3-4 years ago, called Sikh Lead, where we're both trying to develop folks to pursue public service, public policy, government positions, so that, and taking from a breadth of folks, right? So whether it's you live in a small town in Bakersfield, whether you're going to Berkeley, whether you're going to University of Chicago, whether you're going to like a small town South Carolina college, the access that we want to give is across the board, they're equal. The other piece is then we have a leadership program where specifically we're trying to target folks that are not just high achievers, but also kind of diversity of thought, diversity of location. So it's great if I have 8 kids from Berkeley and Stanford that want to go into iBanking or consulting, and they're really smart. Like, that's great, and I don't discourage that, but it doesn't help to have all of them in one class. It actually helps if you've got somebody who's interested in art or in journalism, so that they can form this really powerful cohort, but then also they're geographically dispersed. So what we saw 2 years ago was our first cohort, 3 years ago, excuse me, our first cohort actually organized across the country in 6 locations, a college writing and college preparedness workshop. So they went out to the local gurdwaras, got then all the kids together who were of high school age and began to talk to them about how do you apply to college, what do you do. during the process, like what do you have to expect, what are the fees you have to pay, how can you get money to do these things. So it's also looking to try to identify people locally to say, hey, look, you live in San Jose or wherever you might live. Can you help be a local advocate, a local voice for us? Yeah, maybe you're not a lawyer or a professional advocate or an activist, whatever it might be. Ultimately, though, you still are smart and can identify what issues are and help communicate back that to us so that we can, I think one of the issues both of our communities face is poor documentation. So making sure we write it down and then tell somebody about it. And then we have a record of both we wrote it down and we have a record of we told somebody about it. But then also it can come to our attention, right? We can do something about it. That answer your question? Yes. Thank you.
I think the thing I would, so I know that there's conversation in like immigrant Muslim communities about the impact that colonization had on the rank and importance placed on religious leadership and religious careers, right? So at one point it used to be that the best of the best were the scholars, the best of the best were the Quran teachers, the best of the best led the mosques. And one of the first things that happened as a result of colonization was that you delegitimized that work because that was where people drew their strength to stand up from, right? And so all of a sudden it was like, oh, the smart kids are doctors and engineers. The ones that don't do so well in school, they're the ones that you send out to be the scholars. And so sometimes I wonder how much of the way the immigrant segment of the Muslim community approaches nonprofit jobs and advocacy careers is a reflection of that sort of carried over. I know that when I started at CAIR, and I did K through JD, so I went all the way through, and then I took a job at CAIR. And so people asked me, wait, is that a real job? Like they pay you? And I mean, nonprofit work isn't comparable to corporate work, so maybe that's what they meant. But in terms of pay, not in terms of work. The work is long and hard. But that why you went to law school, like, and even internally, like having to deal with initial sort of concern by leadership that are you in this as a, like, do you see this as a career move? Like, are you planning to stay and make an investment in your work? Or is this until you get a real job, right? And so even internally, seeing that. And so I think some of that continues. That said, though, it's important for the communities who support these organizations to really fully support these organizations. Is that it cannot be that advocates cannot pay rent while they are, serving the community 24/7. There's a really great piece up about when you should leave your social justice job.
I saw this too.
But it's about like feminist organizations, right?
But sometimes very applicable also.
Exactly, and so it's like you need to make sure, as a community, we need to make sure that, and this is true for any nonprofit that you're supporting. It's on us as supporters of these nonprofits to make sure that their staff have health insurance, have benefits, that their kids are not hungry, that they have retirement plans, that they have safety nets, because they are, one, working really hard to protect everyone, but two, also risking career blacklisting, right? And so I don't know, Kavneet, if you ever want to go work like in the aerospace defense industry, not that you would, but like, would it be hard? I know if I did, it would definitely be hard. And that's not that if I did, I would deserve to not get that job. But
you and adding not so much. You and math not so much.
Right. Anyways, so it wouldn't work. It wouldn't work, right? For me to go get that job. If I wanted to go work at a big corporate firm, I may have trouble getting that job because I did advocacy work for a long time. So understanding that it's important that we take care of those that work in our communities. That said, I'm still meeting more people who want to do this work than any of the organizations have capacity to hire. So even with all of the roadblocks, there are lots of people lining up to do the work and not enough money to actually pay them to do it.
Yeah, and I think that's been an interesting trend. You've seen people, oh yeah, this would be something I'd consider. Yeah, I want to do it. I think it's just generally that millennial generation is now far more entrepreneurial and focused on issues that matter to them. Like they actually want to work towards that. That's one of sort of the things that's in the DNA of millennials. And you're seeing that, but yeah, then it's capacity. Right? Like I'd love to hire 6 kids if I could. I can maybe afford to hire. If that. Yeah.
Yeah. So Bill Maher recently, Bill Maher, is that?
Yeah.
It's okay. We can pronounce his name wrong.
I know.
Yeah,
Sorry.
they do.
I'm
Like,
so sorry.
So Bill Maher last week. He talked on a show about Islam, and he had all these statistics about like things that happen in Islam, like female genital mutilation and stoning, and basically all these criticism of Islam. And I was wondering if you, I don't know if you know, but I was wondering if you knew, like, where do you think people hold these things from? And,
Orientalism.
yeah, and like, are they true, and like, how legitimate, and why people are so quick to make these statistical claims, and then
90% of Egyptian women undergo female genital mutilation. They said that on CNN. 90% of Egyptian women.
I mean, and here's the thing, right? Is that
with Reza Islam? That one?
That was the countering to Reza Islam. So they had that interview with Reza Islam. Then there was another one where they're like, okay, let's recap what happened and why we were intimidated.
Don Lemon is acting a fool recently. Just for the
does
record.
anyone know the statistic on sexual assault in the U.S.? I always forget.
It's pretty high.
1 in
What is it, 1 in 3?
like
1 in 4
every
on
2
college
minutes or something.
campuses. Fraternities,
Right. And it's like every 6 minutes.
300%
It's like
high
every 6
rate.
minutes or something.
Every 6 minutes, right? So like imagine if people in Egypt said every 6 minutes, like the Christians in the United States assault women, right? Like sexually assault women. Like that's what it sounds like.
right.
But it's also like it's the same framing. And so Reza Islam in his piece on CNN, I think, does a really good job of saying, look, it's an Egyptian problem, it's an African problem, it's not an Islam problem. And the position, and this is why I think, as much as I don't like the condemnations, sometimes they are helpful, because to the extent that anyone is confused about Islam's position on genital mutilation, on female genital mutilation, Islam scholars make it clear that the majority of them say that this is not okay, that this is not acceptable. And it's sort of this ongoing conversation that we have about who is to blame when people act incorrectly, when people act wrong, right? And so, and a lot of, one of the things we've seen with sort of like with the new wave of atheism is blaming all organized religion. But then you can point to capitalism for sort of an equal amount of violence, and it's people, it's not necessarily the theory. I hate to sound like a gun rights advocate, but it's that whole guns don't kill people, people kill people thing, right? And I'm not endorsing the position, I'm just saying it's that issue. It's not that Islam kills people, it's not that Islam mutilates people's genitals, it's that people do that. So I think that's what I would say, but the statistics, I don't imagine necessarily that the statistics are incorrect. I think that they're taken out of context and framed incorrectly. Oh, sorry, the other thing I would add is that there is something about the way we as Westerners look at other countries' problems. And so the comparison for me is always like
those animals.
Right, those animals. But like what is torture? What is torture to you is torture to me is torture to someone else, and how does that parallel? And so in California, for a very long time under the 3 strikes law, your 3rd strike would put you in jail for 25 life, and it didn't matter what it was, right? It could be something as simple as stealing something minor. I know in some cases there were some extreme examples of stealing a slice of pizza, or being accused of aiding and abetting a bar fight, things of that sort. In Saudi Arabia, a comparable offense would get your hand cut off, right? Now, to us as Westerners, sitting here having your hand cut off sounds incredibly barbaric. But so does sitting in jail for 25 years to life for stealing a slice of pizza, especially when you know the condition of U.S. jails, and with everything from like the rape to the diseases to the overcrowding to the malnutrition. So which of those choices is the humane choice, and what gives us the moral authority to condemn the way other people engage in justice practices when ours are so bad?
I was wondering, how does SALDEF and CAIR engage in like Islamophobia and related instances? Cold. Yeah. Sorry. I'm also sick too. On college campuses. I'm a 2nd year graduate student right now, and I'm still lost about like how it's almost 2015, but people like David Horowitz is still given a lot of legitimacy through his Islamofascism. Peers, I mean, I've told you this, have been like when they protest against someone or something, they face jail time. Whereas other folks who went out to a protest, it's like, oh, these activist kids, they're so idealistic. And, you know, how do you deal with, like, people like David Horowitz? Islamofascism criminalizes us, you know, and, like, what kind of cases do you handle through that? And just to give you some context, I went to East Riverside. I remember 2010, 2011, a lot of incidences arose. The Riverside Gurdwara, I think this one was actually last year, it got tagged, graffiti saying "Go Back Home Terrorists."
Right.
A masjid in the Inland Empire, what city? I think Ontario, primarily frequented by Bengali Muslims. Someone took, you know, butchered some pigs and tossed pig heads at the masjid. I mean, this was all going on when I was an undergrad, and I was wondering, how did CAIR and SALDEF approach those issues, and especially with academics who are out to criminalize students like David Horowitz?
I want to say that there is no one solution. First Amendment is our friend and foe when it comes to things like this, right? And so for me as a civil rights lawyer and as a fan of the First Amendment, I would always suggest that the solution to bad speech is more speech. And so if David Horowitz has a really loud platform, if someone has Fox News, if someone has 1 million followers on Twitter, whatever it is, like, we need to contribute to the marketplace of ideas. As Muslims, we believe that, what is it, that darkness can never extinguish light. And so if we're continuing to put light out into the conversation, that's the way we combat it. Now, in terms of practical methods for combating it, we encourage people to get to know their neighbors, to get to know their coworkers. I'm terrible at statistics, so that's why I didn't use any of them today. But over 50%, the one that I always remember is that over 50% of Americans have never met a Muslim. I imagine it's even fewer for the Sikh community. And I guess it's that they know of, right? And so how do we change that? Studies have shown, actually in the LGBT community, that personal relationships are far more impactful than anything any pundit or advocate or outlet will say. Because if I can say that, like, my neighbor is a Muslim and, you know, comes and visits me when I have chemotherapy, or checks in on me and has been helpful in these situations, and that's going to be more impactful than anything Fox News will ever say. I will always remember that relationship. And so at a very personal level, we encourage people to get to know other people. And that's really easy to do when you're in college. It actually gets really hard after you leave college, especially because you socialize with your family, you socialize with your close friends, you tend to hang out with people, coworkers, right? But like your circle becomes really narrow after you leave college, and in many cases, as it becomes narrow both in terms of the number of people, but also the type of people, right? And so college is really where you have the opportunity to get to know a lot of people, some of who maybe you don't ever want to be friends with, but who you can have an impact on, who are very different from you. And then, in terms of engaging the media, really important that when the media is covering something inappropriately or incorrectly or giving bad airtime to an issue that we don't want to have airtime, or not giving airtime to something that we think is really important, that we hold them accountable to that. And then also that we thank them when they do it right. For me, a really recent example is President Obama, who I am not a fan of, in his recent speech about ISIS, says very clearly, to his credit, that ISIS is both not an actual state and it is also not Islamic, right? And he's very clear about that. And he's intentional about continuing to refer to it as ISIS and ISIL, but never actually as the Islamic State. And yet the next morning, all of the reports about his speech seem to neglect that part of what he said and call it the Islamic State, the Islamic State, the Islamic State, which is why, as a result now across the country, we're seeing an increase in reports of hate incidents with people targeting Muslims or yelling profanities and things of that sort, because all of the media coverage has been Islamic State, Islamic State. There's a benefit to President Obama calling it ISIS, calling it ISIL. It's very wise of him, right? He understands the consequences of calling it the Islamic State for American Muslims and Sikhs and others here. So that's the media. And then I would say that the third piece is working with administrations where we are. So if it's a workplace setting or a campus setting, we may not always agree with the administrators and the managers, but it's important to build alliances. I would say overwhelmingly, even when I don't agree with them on things like student tuition or staffing or class scheduling, we can find agreement on not wanting hate speech on our campuses, on wanting to protect the First Amendment, but also make sure that we're protecting our communities. So work with the administrators time and again. And then the last thing, is build power with other communities. And this ties into a lot of what I've said, but one thing that I heard a rabbi say recently that I thought was really valuable was that in the last century, the Jewish community was very intentional about, and this was straight from a rabbi, was very intentional about working on issues that did not directly impact their community, because it was about building reciprocal relationships. One, because it was all of our faiths call us to work towards justice, and our faiths don't say justice for just us, they say justice, right? And so that means that even if it's whether it's the grocery store workers going on strike, or truck drivers, or immigration, or drug rights, or any of those things, right? That making sure that we're working for justice, because that's what our faiths call us to do. It is the right thing to do. But the selfish reason is also that I scratch my back and you'll scratch yours, right? And it may not be today or tomorrow, but if I build that relationship, then we can work together. And so after hearing that, I was like, that makes so much sense, because one of the challenges that we face in the Muslim community, and I touched on this earlier about interfaith, is that we want everyone to know about Islam. We don't know anything about anyone else. We know nothing about Christianity, about Judaism, about Hinduism, because we're just so self-centered about it. Similar to social justice issues. We want everyone to care about racial profiling. We want everyone to care about the wars abroad, about drones, all of those things. But you could not count, you'd find 2 Muslims at a comprehensive immigration reform rally. You would find 2 Muslims at a low-wage worker solidarity event, right? And so making sure that we're turning outwards and saying, even if and a lot of times that's simply because we're misinformed and those issues do impact us. Both of those issues impact us. But even if we think they don't, that we need to be there, right? We need to build those relationships and build power together, because so many of these issues are interrelated. The folks that are bad to workers and are against comprehensive immigration reform are also likely anti-Muslim and anti-Sikh.
Yeah, the only thing I think I would add, I think Zahra killed it. So the 2 things I would probably add is, the gaps with the media, very clearly that's an issue. I think building across coalitions is important. So in New York, with the bus ads that were 2 weeks ago?
Yeah.
So we had Sikh voices there, which was great. That we could actually see young, articulate Sikhs speaking out against this issue and against intolerance, and I think that's really critical. The third is, I think sometimes we feel that we're not necessarily always effective in getting our word out there, whether it's media gap or whether it's even universities or places hearing us of why we object to these things. But part of it's just that the action of doing it creates momentum. People see that, people realize, oh, this is an issue, and maybe it doesn't work at that time, but it works down the road. And so it's that the first step towards the goal you really want.
Anyone else have any comments, questions? Anyone? And I know you both had a tiring day with rush hour and all that, so.
I'm trying to get Kavneet. It's the end of it. It's been 2 weeks. I'm not contagious now.
I took a midterm today, sneezing and coughing, and my professor was like, "Do you have any sanitizer that I could just use on your midterm?"
Oh, I was that way last week.
I was that case today. Anyone?
I think one of something, maybe this, sorry for taking time.
No.
No,
it brings me back how I got involved in these things despite being an engineer. I was in Sikh activism before I joined campus politics at UC Davis, and what brought me in was something totally random. And there was an event by Ayn Rand Society at UC Davis, and there were, you can say, certain things that were said that were prejudiced against Muslims, especially, and especially Palestinians in general. So the writer of the resolution, who introduced the resolution, she was a Hindu, and I randomly met her just 2 weeks before the resolution was introduced, and she brings up, "Do you want to speak at the hearing?" I'm like, sure, why not? Right? And when I go at the Senate hearing, student government, and the hearing went on until 5 a.m. or 6 p.m. It's 5 a.m. And I was surprised to see hatred against people of, like, you can say, immigrant or brown communities, right? And unfortunately, I was the only, maybe there was another one, non-Muslim supporter who was vocal in, like, from the community in general, saying Islamophobia does exist on campuses, and every year, we were talking about every UC passes like a resolution, this is bad, that's it. Every year something happens, they spit on our faces, or they like remove our turbans or something like that, or they call us like terrorists on campus, and every year it's the same thing. Right now is the time to do something different. And then I was telling it the story, and there was so much hatred, like, in the room. So it's my turn around 11 p.m. and the story is, I used to drive buses in UC Davis, and this one lady got on my bus one time. And when this incident happened, I didn't think of it much. And when speaking of this incident, was a year after it happened. And she gets on the bus, and she stands in the doorway. She's standing there looking at me. I thought maybe she's disoriented or something like that. She's lost. She's a senior citizen. So is there something I can do for you, ma'am? She said nothing. Ma'am, may I help you? And she points her, I'm not sure now if it's a finger or a stick at me. Are you the driver? And I didn't know what to say. But I felt like saying, no, ma'am, I'm the hijacker.
Note to self.
Don't say that.
No, I did not say that.
Okay.
What are you? No, because I can feel what she was thinking. Of course, I am sitting behind the wheel with a seatbelt on. I am the driver. Who else could I be? And because that's where I was going in the end.
Right. So what did you respond? What happened?
I just told her, yes, ma'am, I'm the driver. Please have a seat.
And then what did she do?
She sat down. Nice. But the thing is, like, I could have like gone back. I never thought of it as like a big incident until like when I got introduced to Islamophobia on campus. Like I said, when I was speaking at the hearing.
Yeah.
And it brought to my attention that a lot of times we are so passive in
it's easy, right?
in our everyday lives that, oh yeah, it happened. Like my first time it happened to me was downstairs, December 2007. Someone approaches me. He's like, "Are you going to bomb this place?" At that time, I was a new immigrant here. I was here only for like it has been like 4 months since I've been here. I didn't think of it much until 5 years later. So maybe there's like a need to change attitude inside the community of it. I need to like stand up against this. One of my friends, she is a white Muslim. Her family's from Bosnia, and she didn't start wearing a hijab until 9 months ago, I would say. 9-10 months ago. She hadn't seen her doctor in like a year and a half. So she went to see her doctor last week. And her doctor asked her, "Are you going to join jihad?"
Oh gosh.
Maybe. And she's like, "What am I supposed to say?" I should speak for her.
Yeah.
For anyone, apparently.
I think sorry, I don't know if you're
my point is that how do we change this attitude?
Yeah. It's interesting, right? So, I mean, from a Sikh perspective, I want to speak to that specifically because I think it's a duality of our concept of Jadvigalat teaches us to be like, whatever, dude, right? I think also these are really small things. At the end of the day, like in our heads, we think of them. Sorry, let me take that. We think of them as small things. I think I grew up in this country, so I do presentations a lot for law enforcement, and that's the thing I always tell them. I'm like, look, I appreciate any sort of name you can come up with that demean me in some way, as we do a kind of free exercise about just like what are the things you think about when you see somebody like me. I grew up in a small desert town in Southern California that was like 20 miles away from one of the Western regional hotspots of the KKK. I grew up in what, like when we stereotypically, Zahra talked about that, when you think about the spectrum of Fox News, when you think of the absolute far end of that spectrum, 30 years later I can look back and be like, holy crap, that's actually what I grew up in. Farming community, primarily, agricultural, like folks who, I mean, literally I had buddies who went home and had farms. Complete lack of diversity, really sort of right-wing Christian beliefs, and I didn't notice it as a kid. And obviously now, in retrospect, I can look back and say, oh yeah, And so I think I've heard everything across the board, so it doesn't bother me anymore. But then part of me says, wait a minute, should I go engage with that person? So the person says to you, hey, I'm going to blow up something. You probably just walked away, right, and just tossed it up?
That was back then, not now.
Yeah. Is there merit to have said, oh, well, what do you mean? Oh, well, do you think I'm this? Actually, well, I'm not related to any sort of terrorist thing. I'm a Sikh. Right? I mean, there's that level of discourse you can have, but sometimes I think we either want to get away with it because it doesn't bother us. Because, I mean, if that's the biggest thing we have to worry about, you know, that was my mentality, at least. That I thought, look, there's so many worse things that are going on. I mean, look at our very recent history, what Sikhs in Punjab were dealing with, and I'm worried about somebody called me a name. Let's juxtapose that. But I think, yeah, you're right. How do you get people to step out of that comfort zone or step out of that security of, I don't really know that somebody said it, but take it as an opportunity for learning? That's tough. Yeah, and there's simple ways and there's hard ways. Like sometimes it's just not worth it. You're running to a class or you're running to work and somebody says something stupid and you're like, thanks, and you're moving on. But it does take effort of, are you willing to just engage with that person for 2 minutes to show them, oh wow, you speak English really well. I mean, that in and of itself is sort of a mind-blowing thing.
Ever since I came into San Jose, yeah.
So, you know, there's that level of discourse you can engage with. And how do you change the community's perception? Part of it's, Zahra talked about, like, you know, until something happens to you, all of a sudden then you're very much like, oh, I want to get involved and do something, or I want to make whatever happened to me not happen again. But yeah, I think you're showing great awareness of that. That's something we need to be better about. I think as a community, I can't speak for the Muslim community, but I think for us, that's something definitely we can be better about. And taking 2 minutes to explain that. And you see stories of people saying, oh yeah, you know, I said this to this person who said this to me in the store, and it was great. Because sometimes people just don't even know. It's not necessarily they're bigoted. They're just sort of trying to be funny or flippant, or they think this is acceptable. And then when you talk to them about it, they realize, oh, hey, you know, that was actually pretty stupid. We did something, I want to say 2 years ago, when the Sikh young man Gurpreet Singh was on American Idol. And so realizing that,
They're so racist towards them.
Yeah, so realizing we're like, holy crap, he's on American Idol, that's awesome. He was one of the graduates of our leadership program as well, so we had a lot of love for him just naturally. And then we realized, holy crap, there's also going to be, the Twitterverse is going to be crazy with what's happening. And so we monitored Twitter that night, and so obviously it shows different time zones. So we were monitoring throughout the night, and then I basically kept looking up every single thing, everything, Turban, Turbanator, Osama, whatever. And we started engaging in conversations with folks via Twitter. Hey, actually, you know what? He's not a terrorist. He's a Sikh. Learn about Sikhs here. Obviously, conflation with Arabs, Muslims, whatever it was, and be like, look, he's actually not Arab Muslim. Not that they're related to this either. You can learn about Sikhs here. And so we began to engage with, and overwhelmingly, people were like, oh, hey, I was just joking, but thanks for this. Oh, hey, that's cool. There are also people who obviously told us to go to hell, and that's expected. But I think at the micro level, things that you can do really do affect change.
So it's funny, the girl that was sitting, I think, in the fourth row.
Tasneem, yeah, you saw
just posted on Facebook, on the Facebook event, that she, I guess as she left here, somebody yelled Osama at her.
terrorist,
Yeah, and so I guess I would agree with you that the name calling is itself not the worst thing possible. But one of the things that's always interesting for me is how low the civil rights complaint numbers are from the Muslim and Sikh community, and I would think that part of that is because we have internalized what's normal, and you compare that to our allies in the Jewish community and the LGBT community, where the complaint numbers are ridiculously high, and appropriately so. Like I do believe that it is more frightening to be LGBT in certain parts of the country than it is to be Muslim or Sikh. That we might get called names, they might get killed. And that's not to say that there aren't murders happening on both ends, but that it's really frightening across the board, and unfortunately bigotry is rampant, targeting a number of communities. But the LGBT community and the Sikh community, they report and they document far better than we do. And so 10, 20 years from now, when Kavneet's like kids are giving this presentation and they want to be able to talk about, I don't know if you have kids, well, when my cat is giving this presentation, like we're going to be able to want to look back and say, this is what our community is experiencing, and without documenting all of it, we're not going to say that. the other part of it is that where you have 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 hate incidents on a campus or in a community, it might be indicative of the need to do something proactive to prevent any of that from escalating to a hate crime. And so we recommend documenting all of it, not so that that person in that hallway gets in trouble, but so that the advocates, the administrators know what's going on and know maybe what needs to be engaged with. And I would agree that it's not that, I guess for me, I'm thinking of it in like an employment context or a school context. I don't necessarily want the teacher or the employer that does or says something of that sort to be fired immediately. I want the opportunity to engage with them to see if they are willing to apologize, if it's just a matter of them needing to learn. But that is on all of us to turn around and engage those people. And sometimes it's not worth it because you're in a rush, or it's not safe, or you're by yourself, or you just get bad vibes. But a lot of times it is really easy to start to have that conversation. And the thing that I think I'm most perplexed by as an anti-war activist who also engages in this work is I want to have a nuanced conversation about why there's terrorism in Palestine and how political the word terrorism is. And sometimes we don't even get there because first we've got to at least stop and say, hey, like, no, that's not okay. I'm what? No, I'm the bus driver, right? And so we can have the deeper conversation if we at least first have the superficial one to get it started.
I wanted to add on to what Tasneem just said on Facebook and whatnot, and I'm speaking from my experiences. I've had family members here since the 80s, and when the Iran crisis Khamenei came into power, just to give a background, my family, we are South Indian Orthodox Christians, so our Christianity is tied to the Middle East, Mediterranean, but for the most part we look South Indian, we dress very South Indian, and like most South Indians, the men have a mustache. One time, my uncle was just outside, but he was wearing his skirt like what South Indian men is like a skirt. It's called a dhoti. I think that's a universal term. And someone called him an Iranian, not as a compliment, but to
Right.
as an insult. Personally, I think Iranians are beautiful. So to my uncle, he's a beautiful man. And then my dad, I don't know when this happened. Could have been in the 90s or 80s. He was told by a coworker, like, this is my country, don't tell me what to do, even though my dad was a higher above. And my mom, tells me to this day, don't get involved in politics, whatever they tell you. Sorry, Mom, I'm the president of I try. No, my mom, says try not to get in politics. If they call you, a hateful thing or whatever, just ignore it. God will take care of it. And I know where she's coming from, and sometimes I get into these conversations with saying things that maybe we should step back a little bit, because if we do get into politics, we'll get in trouble. And the other thing is that they're like, just let it be. Don't, if they say these things, no need to report, because it takes a lot of time and effort. So I think that there might be other South Asian parents who also tell their kids, like, okay, they call you a terrorist, just don't say anything. Just don't say anything. So I think that also affects us negatively, and that's why we have lower reports, because it does happen to us. It happens on a daily basis. In fact, I think there are statistics on this. Is that yes, since 2001 we were targeted. But when this recession came about, we got targeted more. And
I think we play good scapegoats, right?
Yeah.
The economy, you taking our jobs, or that aspect. The best one I ever heard was my brother and my dad were going to a Target back where I grew up. So this is probably, let's say 87, 88, before my brother went to college. So 86 probably. And, it was probably around, I think it was around holiday time, so parking was bad, and they had pulled into a parking spot, and another woman had come up and, was there, but obviously she was second to the spot. So she kind of drove off in a gruff, parked somewhere else, and then, yelled at my dad and my brother, oh, you foreigners, you're coming here and taking our parking spots. So
just for that, just they moved from India just, yeah.
So, there's no shortage of, I think, stupidity that's kind of out there. And I think to Zahra's point, documentation is critical. But at the end of the day, we're not going to probably ever stop every single outburst. The biggest thing, I think, is identifying where the biggest dangers lie? What are trends that we see? Like, are certain schools or certain cities that you see? I mean, New York is a great example right now. In the last month, we had 3 hate attacks against Sikh men. One was run over. One was attacked by his wife, or not by his wife, with his mom, and another was attacked then right after that, like the day after that. So we're still seeing violence against the community, and are there things that are happening? Again, as I was pointing, are there things that are happening at a micro level that we need to? Is it ISIS? Is it the economy? Is it election season? I think all 3 probably play in,
Especially now.
Oh, and there was something else I wanted to touch on, because I really love the point that you made about extending solidarity, but at the same time, we have this mindset of like just us, not justice for everyone. So it's like, but how do I feel like I'm going off on a tangent? Like we at SOG, all right. Huh?
Yeah, I never made that connection at SOG. That's awesome.
Thank you. I've been facing a lot of difficulty, and I don't know if that has to do with politics back in the motherland, but I guess like one of the issues with SOG is that it's a female president from a Christian background, and like because we stress unity, like here's my like co-president, a Pakistani,
Yeah.
and like I'm like I noticed that like I love this which is that SOG, we're getting more interest from minority groups from South Asia, but at the same time, I'm still getting that vibe that we cannot reach out to other demographics. And
what are other demographics? Just for clarity.
Well, okay. So far what has happened to me, at least on this campus, because I'm from SoCal, so I noticed the vibe in San Jose is different. There's been like people trying to say like, oh, it should be called the Indian Student Association or something,
right.
Hindu-esque, and I'm like, no, we're all united. This is South Asian, all of us. It doesn't like we're here for everyone. I don't want us to be exclusive. I want to bring us together. No more separating ourselves.
Yeah.
And I noticed that so far our most interested members have been there's myself and other Christians, Muslims and Sikhs, and I don't know how to phrase this, but how do we get the other groups like Hindus, for example, interested? And I think it may have to do with the elections back in India too. I think it may have to do with elections back in India because I noticed some sentiments have been said about minority groups recently on this campus. And again, I'm just speaking from my experience.
Yeah, I think so. One is I don't know what Riverside is like anymore at least.
I mean, I'm just talking about San Jose right
now.
So.
No, but from Riverside experience versus here, like there's a difference amongst the students. Specifically, San Jose is like a huge commuter campus, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's probably harder to treat people at home.
Agreed. CSUs in general.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my God, yes.
Overwhelmingly, they're commuter campuses. So
but
the dynamic of
international
getting kids to stay.
students have been kind of saying, like it was international students primarily saying like, how come you can't call it the Indian subcontinent group? And
yeah, I mean, I think there's connectivity to that. Right?
I forgot to mention another thing. We were spied on by the HSS, Hindu Swami Civic Sangh, and they have ties to the RSS.
Nice, dude. RSS in that.
Yeah, so I mean, this is what we deal with. I never knew that stressing unity would be so problematic to the South Bay Area.
Mm-hmm.
I did not expect backlash for this.
Yeah, I think so. Nationalism is a very interesting thing. I don't have time to go into it all, but I would say that that's one thing that clearly folks will hold on to, especially international students. Like, well, I shouldn't say especially international students, but that's a specific thing that you'll see. And politics are going to be politics, right? Regardless of whether they're geographies or. It's really interesting that the RSS is spying on it. I don't really get that.
I just learned that they have American branches and they're called the HSS. And I found out through Association for India's Development that like, oh, did you know that they're connected to RSS? And I guess like their interest, I did not realize that their interest was like, oh, a Christian Indian and a Pakistani created a Desi organization.
It's awesome. You guys are on the radar of the RSS. Good job.
Or the HSS.
We made it.
I would put that on a resume.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's street cred for being an actor.
May I add something to that? Like I said, like when I got involved, like, it was more like campus. So I was on the board for Sikh Cultural Association, and I'll keep this as short as possible. So I was on board of Sikh Cultural Association at UC Davis, and after the Wisconsin incident happened, they had like it was in summer, but we had a huge like candlelight vigil in Davis, all 300 attendees. That was not organized by us. It was organized by Davis Community Church, Davis Islamic Center, and things like that. And I was surprised, and that's when I like first got into interfaith, into community events, and slowly moved into student politics. And the program over there we call Middle East and South Asian Studies. And every like student program, every like you can say minority education program at UC Davis especially has like a campus involvement aspect to it. So there were like some was volunteers just like working to make me somewhere visible. And it happened to be over and over I got asked the same question. So why are not more Sikhs involved with this?
Right.
Why are not more Indians involved? And we did something called Solidarity Weekend. Out of the 40 attendees, so like I would say 75% were Muslim or like Middle Eastern, and we struggled with bringing other demographics on board.
Sure.
And the excuse that's often cited by you can say many of Indian groups is that we are social organizations, not really willing to be political.
Right. And that turns people off. I get it.
And to be honest, I was approached by the David Project for a free trip to Israel because of my support of the divestment movement, and an offer that I respectfully turned down. That my morals wouldn't allow me to do that. But it shows that how far these interests are willing to go, because when it came for elections, student elections, David Project sponsored candidates were Indian,
right.
Or I would say Hindu.
Right.
Yeah.
And
there's definitely
a lot of my friends voted for them rather than like listen to me and vote, because they were like guaranteed connections and like placements for internships and those connections.
Yeah, I think there's definitely geopolitics there. Like in the last several years, you've seen a strengthening of the relationship between India and Israel. So that could play in there. I don't want to talk too much about it.
Yeah, I mean neither, but I was just trying to like offer an explanation that this happens.
What I would say to your point, in my experience of campus involvement, engagement, we had the same issue with our Sikh Student Association. Right when I came in, there was probably the middle of my junior year, senior year, there was sort of a changing of of the club, the dynamic of. We were both social and had, fun type things. We would go bowling. We put on a competition for a couple of years that then the club divested from years later. Ultimately, you got to find. I think in your case, you're a bigger umbrella. Mm-hmm. So find the Muslim Student Association and the Sikh Student Association. Try to join things with. Yeah, it'd be great if your listserv or your group swells. But at the end of the day, it's about how can you maybe be a vehicle to start doing work. And then as you do stuff. I hate to use the if you build it, they will come, but partially it is if you build it, they'll come. And it's very much one-on-one. It's convincing people, hey, like for the young folks that showed up today, a lot of that was probably one-on-one outreach. And similarly, it's just about talking to people in the MSAs and in the Students' Council and the Sikh Student Association, whatever it might be, to talk to them, say, hey, this is what we're doing. We'd love to get you involved. Joint events are really huge. We had, like I was saying, I was on campus during 9/11 in Berkeley. And so that week when we did a peace sort of event on the campus, I spoke with one of Zahra's colleagues, who's the ED of Sacramento's CAIR. And really your boss, yeah. And we stood up on campus and we were talking about these things, but in solidarity that you had a Sikh, a Muslim talking about these exact same issues. And part of our connection with the Muslim population and the Hindu students on campus as well was outside of SSA, we kind of started talking about Punjab. That even though there was a partition, we still had this connection of culture. And so around that time, there started to become a resurgence of Pakistani Punjabi. So we had a lot of cool connectivity with them, that they would come to the poem competitions, we do poetry stuff together, whatever it might be. Which then led into 9/11, which was great because we each partnered with each other on kind of I think it started as a walking Sikh Muslim Arab sisters home at nights if they had late classes, but it ended up to be across the board. Like, I mean, even just a Sikh man or a Muslim man walking home at night through certain parts of campus probably wasn't the best idea. So developing kind of something there, and that's how we built on it. To now, that relationship's relatively strong from at least a political standpoint. Like, they're doing a lot of social stuff together. So I would just say, it's awesome that you're on the radar of the RSS, rock and roll, and now it's how do you build forward.
Yeah, I guess. I hate to be rude, but I've got to run out.
No, this event has been officially over as of 10 minutes ago, so I'm so sorry.
Okay,
It's okay, I'm like, I'm going to go to the other side of town.
Oh my god. But thank you so much.
Good to meet you.
Pleasure meeting you. My name is Harpa.
One more time?
Harpa.
Harpa, and you said you know Mahi and Dana. Yes. Okay, I'm looking at that.
Yes, let's go talk. I don't have
Goodbye, interwebs.
Okay, sounds good.
Yes.
Good to see you. Kavneet.
Always a pleasure.